Welcome back to story time. We left at a complete cliffhanger. Does anyone know what a cliffhanger means? Anyone? A cliffhanger is when you don't know what's going to happen next. And some of the best books have the best cliffhangers. So, does anyone remember what happened? Prince Charming caught them. Daphne and Sabrina were dressed up as Mama Bear and the Tin Man, caught them in his office trying to steal the map. And he has one of those bows faced at them like, you better tell me who you are. And Jack is being really weirdly suspicious, and Sabrina found that, like, there's a video, but she hasn't watched the entire video, so we'll see what happens. Okay, guys, I can't even wait anymore. Let's just jump right in. Chapter 10. Again, that's the picture that we have. Some sort of chicken, maybe, running. Here we go. I'm not playing any more games with you people, Charming said. I told you already I'm not interested in joining the Scarlet Hand. Your revolution is not for me. We don't know what you're talking about, Daphne cried. 1, Charming began to count. Sabrina looked over at the clock. There was only seconds left before the magic would wear off, but more than the 5 Charming had promised them. We're Reldus Grimm's granddaughters, she blurted out desperately. 2, we used magic wand to change our shape so that we could sneak into your house, Daphne cried. Oily tears leaked from her eyes. 3, we're not part of any revolution, Sabrina begged. We just want our grandmother back. 4, we're not lying to you, Daphne sobbed. 5, Sabrina closed her eyes tightly and awaited her death, wondering if she would be stuffed like the other bear in Charming's office, or if her body would change back after her heart had stopped beating. But when nothing happened, after a few more moments, Sabrina bravely opened her eyes. She and her sister had magically transformed back into their normal states. The only evidence of their disguises was the oily smears on Daphne's cheeks. Ladies, I could toss you into jail and throw away the key for what you've done, Charming said, removing the arrow from the crossbow. You've used a magical item to help a known criminal escape from jail, infiltrated an Ever-Afters party without an invitation, impersonated Ever-Afters, committed espionage against a government official, broken into my home, put the Fairyport Landing Ball in serious jeopardy, and ruined 2 pairs of Sheriff Hampstead's pants. We didn't ruin your stupid party, Sabrina argued. If that crowd downstairs sees the 2 of you here, the top of this house will fly off, Charming replied. The only way we're going to prevent a mob is to have Hampstead toss you in some old sacks and carry you out the servants' entrances. He can take you down to the jailhouse and let you cool off in a sail. Sabrina lunged for the video camera. The wires came with it, and the image of the giant faded from the television screen. We're not going anywhere without our grandmother and Mr. Canis, Sabrina said. This tape is all the evidence we'll need. How do you think these people downstairs are going to feel knowing that you intend to buy up this town and smash anyone that gets in your way? Sabrina expected Charming to fight for the tape, but instead he only laughed. Ugh, you are like your parents, Charming chuckled. Henry was always shooting his mouth off before his brain could catch up, and Veronica was the suspicious one. What an unsettling combination you are. Suddenly, something moved in the window. Sabrina turned her head, but nothing was there. Did you see that? See what? Charming asked, as a giant pus-filled eye peered into the house. Ugh, there's a picture! Ooh, I don't know about you, but that is one ugly giant. Ugh. And there's Prince Charming. Okay. Englishman! A booming voice growled, shaking the windows in their frames. That! The girl shouted. Charming calmly picked up the phone on his desk and dialed a number. Mr. 7, are you aware that there's a giant outside? He said into the receiver as if he were informing a waiter that there was a hair in the soup. Oh, you didn't know. Well, now you do. No, this isn't some kind of emergency drill. Well, I agree. We should do something about it before the guests panic. Maybe you should send the witches out to put a protection spell on the house. Well, of course it's a good idea. Charming slammed the phone down, crossed the room, and dragged both girls roughly out of the office and down the hall. "Where are you taking us?" Sabrina demanded. "Keep your heads down and don't say a word," Prince sneered. "I'm taking you outside." An acidy fear rose up in Sabrina's throat as they stumbled out of his office and into the second-floor hallway. "You can't take us out there with that thing!" Sabrina cried, pulling at Charming's vice-like grasp. "You wanted to find your grandmother? Well, her ride just showed up," he said. "Help!" Sabrina cried as they turned a corner and headed down a long hallway toward the back of the house. Daphne took her sister's cue and called for help as well, causing many of the guests to look up and see what was happening. "Those are the Grimm children!" and an orangutan shouted angrily. "No need to let it ruin your evening," said Charming with his toothy smile. "I have the situation under control." "They're spying on us!" the Queen of Hearts gasped. "Off with there!" "They aren't spies, my friends," the prince said as he changed course and pulled the girls down the stairs with him into the angry crowd. "Please go back to your celebration." But before he could get the words out of his mouth, a horrible crunching sound filled the room. The partygoers looked to the ceiling only to see it ripped off right before their eyes. Pieces of plaster fell down, and everyone in a collective scream erupted among the upper rafters. "The sky is falling! The sky is falling!" a chicken cried as it raced for the door, only to get caught in a stampede of terror when the hole in the roof was replaced by a giant's horrible, gnarled face, breathing its rancid, rotten egg breath down on the crowd. The Queen of Hearts ran to a nearby window, threw open the curtains, and tried to climb out. Her playing card attendants rushed over just in time to catch her from falling over. The rest of the crowd ran in all directions, and the panic gave Sabrina and Daphne a chance to break Charming's grip. They rushed into the crowd and ducked between legs and feathers, and all sorts of unusual creatures rushed around them. "Where is the murderer?" the giant bellowed. "He's not here, big boy. The murderer is not here," Charming shouted as he turned to face the monster. "Liars! You protect him!" the giant growled. "I smell his murderous blood. He released me only in hopes of killing me, but my fate will not be like that of my brothers and sisters. He is here, and I will have him." Charming looked up at the staircase to the violinists, who were scattered in fear. "I didn't tell you to stop playing," he said, snapping his fingers to them. Bewildered, the musicians went back to their overturned chairs, set them upright, and began playing the music, as if the giant wasn't staring down at them. "Fee, fi, fo, fum! I smell the blood of an—" "I think we've all had enough of your temper tantrum," Charming interrupted. Suddenly, 3 fingers fluttered into the air and hovered around the giant's head. One of them was an ugly old woman darting through the air on a broom. The second was strikingly exotic beauty dressed all in black who levitated off the ground. And the third was a blonde lady inside a silver bubble. As she floated by, Sabrina recognized her as Glinda from the hospital. All 3 had magic wands when they waved threateningly at the giant. The monster swatted at the witches, but they weaved and bobbed out of the way of his massive hands. The ugly witch waved her hand, and a rocket flame shot at it and exploded at the giant's chest, searing his shirt and causing him to scream in agony. "Stop!" Daphne cried. "Our family is in his pocket!" The little girl broke away from her sister and ran outside. Sabrina, followed by Charming, rushed after her. The witches had flown out of the hole into the roof and now continued their assault, which means like attack. "Leave while you can, giant!" Charming shouted. The second witch raised her wand and a stream of lightning fired out of it, hitting the giant in his face. The giant roared with pain and raised his hands to block the bolt. A charred black smear was added to the other ugly features on his grizzled face. Glinda waved her wand, and a spray of ice froze the giant's backside and continued to cover the rest of his body. Within seconds, the massive man was encased in an ice bomb. But soon, cracks appeared with flexing muscles and a powerful roar. The giant broke free. Enormous chunks of ice rained down, and the parking lot flattened an unlucky car. The doors of the mansion were thrown wide, and a dozen of men rushed out past the girls. Each was in a purple tunic embroidered with a red lion on the chest. Swinging their swords wildly in the air, they roared a war cry as they rushed toward the giant. At the front of the attack was a man Sabrina instinctively knew to be King Arthur. King Arthur was of the Round Table. Don't know if you've heard that story. The knights charged the giant's feet, and together they whacked angrily at an exposed big toe. The giant roared at the assault and stomped his feet angrily, trying to squash his attackers. Each of the men was lightning quick and dodged the giant's blows, managing to strike at its exposed ankle in the process. Shrieking in pain, the giant quickly turned and fled. He ran away. Charming knelt in respect as the king and knights turned to face him. "I am indebted to the knights of the Round Table. Thank you, your highness," Charming said. "Your thanks will not be enough, Charming," King Arthur barked. "The beast destroyed my car. Trust that you will find a repair estimate in the mail this week." Charming scowled, but as the party guests filed out of the half-destroyed mansion, he forced a smile. Mr. Seven rushed to the prince's side, carrying a large black pot he held out to the approaching crowds. "Friends, who says nothing exciting ever happens in Fairyport Landing?" the prince chuckled, but this time his wit and charm fell on angry ears. The people passed him, returning his laughter with disgusted looks. "Is this what we're paying you for?" the White Rabbit said as he hopped past. "People, there's no need to leave," Charming said. "We'll have the mansion back to its old self in just a matter of moments. There's plenty of food and drink, and we've even arranged a door prize." As the elected leader of this community, I would have thought that you take the safety of your constituents much more seriously, a Bengal hired said as he stalked past them. "I assure you, Shere Khan," but the tiger didn't stop to hear Charming's assurances. "Well, if you all must go, please don't forget to donate to the Fairport Community Fund," the prince continued, kicking Mr. Seven, who immediately held the pot higher so that everyone could see, but not a single penny was added to the donations. "I do believe this town is in need of some new leadership," the Queen of Hearts said as she left. Charming said nothing as he watched the last of his guests drive away. "Put the pot down, Mr. Seven," he said. The dwarf slowly lowered the empty pot and took a peek inside. "We want our grandmother and our friend," Sabrina demanded. "This is all your fault," Charming shouted as he turned to them. "What? You two brought him here!" "If you can't control your giant, then maybe you shouldn't be working with one," Daphne advised. "I'm not working with any giant. Only a fool who wants to be someone's lunch would make a deal with a giant," Charming said. "That's a lie," Sabrina yelled. "He's one of your goons, just like those guys who you met at the cabin." "Ladies, I'm of nobility. I don't have goons. Those men don't work for me. I was there to arrest them and their boss." "Well, if you're not their boss, then who is?" Sabrina demanded. Charming snatched the video camera from Sabrina's hand. He opened a side panel where a small LCD screen folded out. Then he rewound the recording, pressed the play button, and handed the camera back to the girls. The image was shaky at first, but then suddenly it cleared up as the person holding the camera set it down on the hill that overlooked Applebee's farm. 4 men were talking to one another. 2 of them were extremely tall. Another was short and fat, and the 4th couldn't be seen. It was obvious who the other three were: Bobby, Tony, and Steve, the goons who attacked the family at the hospital. Finally, the fourth figure stepped in front of the lens, leaned down, and grinned broadly. It was Jack! That's evidence we found on Jack when he was arrested. He wanted a tape of himself killing a giant, Charming cried. It had nothing to do with the farmhouse. In fact, he admitted he thought the farmer had left town. Jack laughed wildly at the camera, held up a small white bean, and then rushed down the hill. Soon, the familiar footage of the beanstalk and the destruction of the giant played again. So you're not trying to buy up the town to rebuild your kingdom? Daphne asked. On the contrary, I am trying to buy up this town, Charming said, but there are better ways to get what you want than to let a giant loose on the countryside. So, Jack is evil. Elvis, the dog, knew that. Okay, we just didn't listen to Elvis. And Prince Charming, he doesn't seem to be a great guy because he did just admit that he wanted to buy up the whole town, but he wasn't doing that with the giant, so. Sabrina didn't know whether to be furious with his admission or respect his honesty. So why did you send the sheriff after us? Daphne asked. He was supposed to pick you up and take you somewhere safe until we could hunt down the giant and find your grandmother, Charming said. Every actor in this town wishes we were dead, Sabrina said. Why would you want to help us? I have my reasons. I'm confused, Daphne said. Why would Jack bring us here and tell us this story about being the bad guy? About you being the bad guy? And why did he want to stay in contact with these if he was just going to take off? Sabrina said, handing Charming the walkie-talkie. Because if he kept you busy, he could go back to your house, the prince said. But he can't get in. He doesn't have the keys, Sabrina replied. He doesn't need the keys, Daphne gasped. We didn't say goodbye to the house when we left. We used the ruby slippers. The house is unlocked. Hampstead, in his human form, came rushing out of the mansion. I've got the deputies chasing the giant, he said. He's heading to the woods in the direction of Widow's Peak. Good job, Charming said. The sheriff beamed with pride. We've also searched the grounds. There are no signs of Jack, Hampstead continued, but we did find this. He held out Jack's bloody handkerchief. So the giant would smell him and come running, Charming said. You might as well join your men, Sheriff. The girls and I will call if we need you. Where are you going? Hampstead asked. The prince took Sabrina's arm and urged Daphne to do the same. We're going back to the Grimm house. I have an unsettling notion of what our giant killer is up to, Charming said. Sabrina clicked her heels together. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. Instantly, the girls and Charming were standing outside of Granny's house. The front door was wide open, and through the doorway, they could see that Jack had ransacked their home. They walked inside. Bookshelves were tipped over, furniture was overturned, and even the couch cushions were thrown aside. He had searched through every kitchen cupboard, empty closets, and destroyed antiques, but his crimes against the house weren't what bothered Sabrina. What hurt her was that she had been tricked. In the last year and a half, Sabrina had learned to be street smart and savvy. She was the one who was supposed to pull fast ones on people. She was the queen of sneaks, and she had been suckered. Suddenly, the telephone rang. She picked up the receiver and said, hello. Hello, this is Wilma Fay at Action 4 News. I'm following up on a tip we got about a half an hour ago. A Mr. Englishman said there would be a murder on Widow's Peak tonight. We've already got a camera crew on the way, but we were hoping we might be able to speak to Mr. Englishman first, the woman begged. He's not here, Sabrina replied. Well, if you see him, tell him that we are very intrigued by the story and we'll have a camera team and reporter there as he requested, the woman continued. Then with a click, she hung up. That was a reporter, Sabrina said. Jack called them and told them there was going to be a murder tonight at Widow's Peak. This is exactly what I was going to try to prevent. He's going to kill a giant on television so he can be famous again, Charming said. When the world sees this little town will be turned upside down by reporters. There's too much here to explain. We've got to stop him. Elvis! Daphne cried. Suddenly, the giant dog was nowhere to be seen. Daphne shouted his name, and after several painful silent moments, a low bark could be heard from upstairs. Daphne rushed upstairs, followed by Sabrina and Charming. She threw open the door to the mirror's room and found Elvis lying on the floor in a small puddle of his own blood. He had a serious cut on his belly, but he barked happily when he saw the girls. Daphne knelt down and kissed the dog gently on his nose. When she lifted her face, tears were pouring down her cheeks. "He hurt Elvis!" the girls sobbed. "Girls, we have to find Jack," Charming said coldly. "We don't have time for this mongrel." Sabrina and Daphne looked at the man as if he were a moldy sandwich that had slowly turned to soup in the bottom of the refrigerator. The prince groaned and took his cell phone from his pocket. He dialed a number and sighed impatiently. "Mr. Seven, I need you to send one of the 3 to the Grimm house. The door is open so you can come right in. There's a dog that needs medical assistance." "Yes, a dog. A dog. No, Mr. Seven, I don't know what's wrong with him. Maybe a broken rib." "No, Mr. Seven." "Yes, Mr. Seven." "Mr. Seven, if you don't stop asking me questions, I'm going to feed you to this dog." Sabrina eyed the man suspiciously, and Charming caught her gaze. "And Mr. Seven, my orders are that whichever one of the witches comes, she respects the house," Charming added. "No snooping." Daphne wrapped her arms around the prince's neck and hugged him as he hung up the phone. "Thank you," she sobbed, and for a brief moment, Charming seemed to enjoy the hug. But then he pulled away from her. "You're ruining my suit," he replied, wiping his lapel clean of the girl's tears. "We should check the mirror." Sabrina gazed over at it. The little man who was usually in its reflection was missing. "Mirror!" Charming shouted. "You have to step through it," said Sabrina. "I'm aware of how it works," the prince said impatiently. "I used to be engaged to one of its former owners." He stepped into the reflection and disappeared. Sabrina followed closely behind, leaving Daphne to nurse Elvis. The little man known as Mir was lying on his side on the cold marble floor, barely conscious and covered in bruises. Charming knelt down to him and lifted the pudgy man's head. Mir slowly opened his eyes and grimaced in pain. "He was too strong and fast for me. I couldn't stop him," the Mir groaned. "What did he take?" Charming said. "I tried to fight him off, but he just laughed at me. You wouldn't believe how quick he is," Mir complained. "Focus! We need to know if Jack took anything." "He took the beans," Mir replied. "How? He doesn't have a key," Sabrina asked, reaching into her pocket and pulling out Granny's key ring. "I forgot to remind you to lock the door after you left him take a peek at the jar," the sad little man said. "I don't get it," Sabrina said. "If killing the giant will make him famous again, why does he want the beans?" "It's insurance. If his fame starts to fade, he'll let another giant out with another one of those beans. The giant will kill people and destroy things, and then Jack will come to the rescue," Charming explained. "But how is he going to find the giant in the first place?" Sabrina asked. "We haven't been able to find him, and he's 200 feet tall." "He's not going to find it. He's going to find him," Charming answered. "Giants have a great sense of smell, especially when it comes to blood. That's why the giant showed up at the mansion. Jack left his bloody handkerchief and the giant could smell it. It's amazing, really, that they can smell anything of their own stink. If one touches you, can't wash off that odor for weeks." Suddenly, Sabrina thought of the 2 pieces of fabric Elvis had brought into the room just before the group had left for Charming's mansion. One was Granny Relda's cloth from the giant, and the other was a piece of Jack's pants. Elvis was trying to warn us that Jack had been near a giant, Sabrina realized. She was a terrible detective. She couldn't recognize a clue when it was offered to her by a 200-pound Great Dane dog. She wanted to kick herself, but she had to focus on what Charming had said. "But if giants have such great noses, why didn't this one attack us here? Jack was in our house for hours," she said to Charming. "Protection spells. If Rel does anything, she's careful. We have one on the jailhouse, too," he replied. "So what are we going to do?" "Mir, I'm going to need something," Charming responded. Oh, my word, guys. I don't know. That's part 1. We're going to have to come back for part 2. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm getting excited. Okay, we'll see you back here soon.